Hi guys, sorry to interrupt your viewing, but please subscribe to the channel and like this video. Thank you.
Some people need to show off what they have to feel important, but I've always believed that reality speaks louder than any flashy display of wealth. That's why, when my cousin Nathan pulled up to the family barbecue in a bright red sports car that looked like it belonged in a music video, I didn't even flinch. I had seen this show before, the way he made sure everyone turned to look, the way he revved the engine unnecessarily, the way he stepped out like he was the guest of honor instead of just another member of the family. He wore an expensive watch, a designer jacket, and sunglasses that probably cost more than my monthly mortgage payment, all while wearing that signature smirk that screamed, "I'm better than all of you." I had just parked my Toyota, a reliable, slightly older model that had never once failed me, and was grabbing a bowl of salad from the passenger seat when I heard him scoff. "Still driving that old thing, Lisa?" His voice carried across the yard, just loud enough to ensure everyone nearby heard. I mean, some of us can afford nice things. I looked up and met his gaze, taking in the way his lips curled upward in amusement, the way his girlfriend, some 20-something with perfectly manicured nails and a vacant expression, laughed as though he had just said something wildly clever. The way our uncle gave a low chuckle, shaking his head as if to say, well, he's not wrong. I could have responded 100 different ways. I could have told him that my car was paid off while he was probably drowning in monthly payments. I could have reminded him that financial responsibility wasn't the same as being cheap. But instead, I just smiled, the kind of slow, knowing smile that made his smirk falter for half a second before he covered it up. "You're right, Nathan," I said, shutting my car door and locking it with a simple beep. "Some of us can afford nice things." I walked past him without another word, letting the weight of my statement settle in, though I knew he wouldn't understand it yet. That was the thing about Nathan. He lived in the moment, in the now, in the constant, desperate need to impress people, never thinking about what was coming next. He had always been like this ever since we were kids. He was the type to spend his entire allowance on a new toy just to brag about it, while I quietly saved mine for something that actually mattered. He was the kind of teenager who begged our aunt and uncle for the newest phone every year, never considering the cost, while I worked after-school jobs to buy my own. He was, in short, the same person he had always been, just with more expensive bad habits. The barbecue carried on as usual, with uncles and aunts gossiping, kids running around with sticky fingers, and the smell of grilled meat filling the air. Nathan, of course, made sure everyone got a tour of his car, popping the hood despite the fact that none of us cared about engine specs. I could hear him boasting about the horsepower, the leather seats, the state-of-the-art sound system, all while his girlfriend clung to his arm as if his wealth was her personal accomplishment. I let him have his moment. I let him bask in the attention, let him enjoy the admiration from distant relatives who still bought into his act. Because that's what it was, an act. It wasn't until later in the evening, when most of the guests had settled into their usual post-dinner conversations, that I happened to overhear something interesting. Nathan was standing just a few feet away, talking to one of his friends, unaware that I was close enough to catch every word. "Yeah, man, it's a sick ride," he was saying, his voice just a little too eager, a little too defensive. "Payments are brutal, though. You wouldn't believe what they're charging me for insurance. Honestly, I maxed out 2 cards last month just covering everything." His friend whistled. "Damn. And your girl doesn't know." Nathan let out a short laugh, one that didn't quite reach his eyes. "Hell no. You think she'd stick around if she knew I was broke?" I didn't react. I didn't even turn to look at him. But inside, I smiled. Because Nathan had just confirmed what I already suspected. His wealth was just a carefully constructed illusion, a house of cards built on debt and desperation. And the best part? He had no idea that I already had my next move planned. The game had just begun. Nathan had always been like this, ever since we were kids, always chasing after the newest and shiniest thing, always needing to be the center of attention, always making sure that whatever I had, he had something just a little better. I remember one summer when we were about 10 or 11, and I had saved up weeks' worth of allowance to buy a simple but sturdy bicycle from a local store. It wasn't anything special, just a standard model with a decent frame and reliable tires, but I was proud of it because I had earned every penny that went into buying it. Nathan, of course, couldn't stand that I had something new that I valued, so within days, his parents had bought him the most expensive bike they could find, a flashy, high-end model with custom features and gears he didn't even know how to use. I still remember the way he had ridden past me that first day, smirking as he lifted his front wheel off the ground, shouting something about how much faster and better his was. I didn't react then, just like I wouldn't react now, because I knew something that he didn't. Flashy things don't last long when they're not built on something solid. As the barbecue continued, I found myself watching him without making it obvious, studying the way he carried himself, the way he performed for the family, the way he made sure that every conversation led back to his so-called success. He held his girlfriend close, letting her drape herself over him as she gushed about how lucky she was to have a boyfriend who could afford such luxury. Her voice was high-pitched and sweet, but there was something calculated about the way she spoke, something almost rehearsed, like she had been trained to recognize wealth and attach herself to it before it slipped away. Nathan soaked it all in, basking in the admiration like he needed it to breathe, laughing a little too loudly every time someone complimented his car, throwing around numbers like they meant nothing, pretending that none of it came at a cost. I decided to push just a little, just enough to see what would happen, just enough to see if I could get past the rehearsed lines and forced confidence. I waited until we were standing near the grill, away from the main conversation, just the two of us for a brief moment, and then I casually asked the question I knew he didn't want to answer. So, how much are the monthly payments on that thing? For a second, just a second, his expression froze, just a brief flicker of hesitation before he quickly masked it with a scoff. "Oh, come on, Lisa. You wouldn't understand," he said, waving a hand dismissively as if the topic wasn't even worth discussing. "People like me don't worry about payments. We just get what we want." I tilted my head slightly, letting his words settle in the air between us, letting him think he had won that moment, letting him believe that I had accepted his answer without question. But I saw the way he shifted his weight slightly, the way his fingers tightened around the glass he was holding, the way his jaw clenched for the briefest second before he forced himself to relax. He was lying, and he knew it, and what was even better, he knew that I knew it too. Later that evening, when most of the guests had started to settle down into quieter conversations, I found myself near the back patio, sipping my drink and listening to the sound of cicadas in the distance. That's when I heard his voice again, low and tense, carrying just enough emotion to make me pause. I wasn't trying to eavesdrop, not exactly, but when someone like Nathan starts to crack, you can't help but watch. "Man, I don't even know how I'm gonna make the next payment," he was saying, his voice laced with frustration, just quiet enough that he clearly didn't want anyone else hearing. "I already maxed out 2 cards just covering the down payment, and the insurance is killing me. If I miss another bill, they're gonna start calling my job." His friend muttered something back, something I couldn't quite catch, but Nathan's response was clear enough. "She has no idea," he said, letting out a short, nervous laugh. "Are you kidding me? If she knew I was stretched this thin, she'd be out of here so fast, I wouldn't even see the dust." I didn't move, didn't react, didn't do anything to make him aware that I had just overheard the exact thing I had suspected from the moment he pulled up in that car. He wasn't rich. He wasn't successful. He wasn't ahead of anyone. He was just a man drowning in debt, desperately pretending to be something he wasn't, desperately clinging to a lifestyle that was nothing more than smoke and mirrors. When I turned back toward the party, I caught his girlfriend glancing in our direction, her perfectly lined eyes scanning Nathan's expression like she was searching for something specific. She must have heard just enough, must have caught just a piece of the conversation, because for the first time that night, her expression changed ever so slightly, the smallest flicker of doubt flashing across her face before she masked it just as quickly as Nathan had. I smiled to myself, taking a slow sip of my drink, because I knew exactly what was going to happen next. The cracks were already forming, and sooner or later, The whole illusion was going to come crashing down. I woke up the next morning with a plan already formed, a decision made quietly and without fanfare, the kind that required no announcement, no validation, no desperate attempt to prove anything to anyone. I had been thinking about it for a while, knowing that my Toyota, while reliable, had served me well for years and was approaching the time when I'd have to make a change. The difference between me and Nathan, however, was that I made decisions based on what I could afford, not what I wanted people to think I could afford. I had saved. I had planned. I had waited until I was in a position to do it without stress, without payments, without the weight of debt hanging over me like an axe waiting to drop. So I drove down to the dealership that morning, handed over the keys to my old Toyota, and picked up the brand new luxury SUV I had chosen weeks ago, a fully loaded model with every feature I had wanted. Every detail carefully selected to fit my needs, paid for in full with nothing hanging over my head. No loans, no monthly payments, no worrying about interest rates or late fees or maxed out credit cards trying to keep up with appearances. The salesman seemed almost surprised when I handed over the check without hesitation, without the usual back and forth of financing discussions, without even blinking at the total amount. He asked if I wanted to trade in my Toyota for a discount, but I shook my head, already knowing exactly what I planned to do with it. Instead of making a scene, instead of pulling up to my next family gathering with the windows down and the music blasting, instead of demanding attention the way Nathan always did when he had something new to show off, I kept it quiet. I drove my new car home, parked it in the garage, and the next time I needed to leave the house, I took the Toyota. Because this wasn't about proving something in a way that Nathan would understand. It was about proving something in a way he wouldn't see coming. Later that evening, another family gathering brought everyone together again, this time at our aunt's house, a casual dinner meant for catching up and sharing news, the kind of event where Nathan thrived because it gave him an audience, a space to showcase whatever he thought made him look better than the rest of us. I had barely stepped out of my Toyota before I heard his voice again, dripping with the same smug amusement as before, the same arrogant laughter that came so easily to him when he thought he had the upper hand. Still clinging to that thing, huh? He called out from where he was standing near the porch, drink in hand, his girlfriend clinging to his side as always. Guess not everyone can move up in the world. This time, I didn't just smile. I didn't just let it slide past me the way I had before, didn't just let his words settle in the air without a response. This time, I reached into my pocket, pulled out the keys, and without a single word, I tossed them in his direction. He barely managed to catch them, fumbling for a second before looking down at his hand, confused for just a moment before looking back up at me. "You're right, Nathan," I said, my voice calm, my expression unreadable, my satisfaction buried just beneath the surface where he couldn't quite see it yet. "Some of us can afford nice things. That's why I bought a new one yesterday. This one's yours if you want it." For the first time in as long as I could remember, Nathan was speechless. He stood there, his mouth slightly open, his eyes flickering between me and the keys in his hand, as if his brain couldn't quite process what had just happened, as if he couldn't understand how the moment had shifted so completely in my favor without him even realizing it was happening. The family, once engaged in their own conversations, had gone silent, watching the exchange with varying expressions of shock, amusement, and curiosity, waiting to see what Nathan would say next. His girlfriend, standing just slightly behind him, had frozen as well, her eyes narrowing ever so slightly, the way a person looks when they suddenly realize they might have backed the wrong horse. She had spent the entire night draping herself over him, laughing at his jokes, clinging to his arm like a trophy that proved his success, but now there was hesitation. Now there was doubt. Now she was looking at him in a way that said, "Prove to me you're still worth my time." Nathan swallowed hard, his fingers tightening around the keys before forcing out a laugh, one that sounded more strained than confident, more forced than amused. "Well, he started, glancing toward his girlfriend, as if waiting for some kind of approval, some kind of reassurance that he hadn't just lost everything in one single, devastating moment. "Guess I could, use a backup, right?" I didn't respond. I didn't need to. Because the look on his face, the way his girlfriend shifted ever so slightly away from him, the way the family had gone from humoring his arrogance to watching him with barely concealed amusement, told me everything I needed to know. The illusion was cracking, the mask slipping, the weight of his own ego finally pressing down on him in a way he couldn't ignore. I walked past him without another word, leaving him standing there holding the keys to a car he had once mocked, a car that was still worth more than his pride, a car that now served as a reminder that some people chase wealth, while others quietly build it. Nathan stood there, gripping the keys to my old Toyota in his hand, his fingers tightening around them like they were some kind of lifeline, his expression caught somewhere between forced indifference and barely concealed embarrassment. I could see the conflict in his eyes, the way he was scrambling internally to salvage the situation, trying to figure out a way to make this moment work in his favor instead of exposing him for exactly what he was. He let out a short laugh, one that was too sharp, too unnatural, the kind of sound a person makes when they're hoping to convince themselves that everything is still fine, even when they know deep down that it isn't. Well, I guess a backup car isn't a bad thing to have, he finally said, his voice laced with forced confidence, his shoulders squaring as if he thought standing taller would somehow make this moment less humiliating. Not everyone gets the luxury of having two cars, huh? His attempt at salvaging his pride might have worked on someone who didn't know him as well as I did, someone who couldn't see the panic simmering just beneath the surface of his carefully crafted expression. But I had spent years watching Nathan pretend to be something he wasn't, spent years witnessing the way he manipulated conversations to always place himself on top. This moment, however, wasn't something he could twist in his favor, because no matter how he tried to spin it, the fact remained that I had just handed him a car, one that he had publicly mocked just a day earlier, without expecting anything in return. And the people watching knew exactly what that meant. His girlfriend, who had been clinging to his side all evening, had suddenly shifted, her arms slowly slipping from his as she took a barely noticeable step away, her perfectly lined eyes flickering between him and the keys in his hand. Her lips pressing together in the way people do when they're processing something they don't particularly like. She had spent the last several months basking in Nathan's supposed wealth, proudly flaunting the fact that she was dating someone who could afford such luxury, but now she was seeing something she hadn't planned for. Something she had likely ignored in favor of the expensive meals, the designer bags, the weekend getaways that had always come with a flash of a credit card and a charming smirk. I didn't have to say anything to know exactly what was running through her mind at that moment, because it was written all over her carefully constructed expression, the doubt, the hesitation, the slow realization that maybe, just maybe, she had placed her bets on someone who wasn't actually as successful as he claimed to be. She was reassessing everything she thought she knew about him, questioning the stories he had told, the image he had carefully built, the illusion that was now crumbling before her in real time. Nathan, ever the performer, either didn't notice the shift in her demeanor or was simply too proud to acknowledge it, choosing instead to give me a forced grin as he jingled the keys in his hand like this entire situation was some kind of inside joke between us. "Well, Lisa, I gotta admit, didn't see that one coming," he said, his voice carrying just enough false bravado to make it painfully obvious that he was trying to save face. "Guess you're finally learning how to make some smart moves, huh?" I could have responded, could have hit him with some sharp remark that would have driven the final nail into the coffin of his carefully maintained arrogance, but I didn't need to. The damage was already done, and the best part was that I hadn't needed to say or do anything beyond handing him the keys. His own insecurity, his own desperation to prove himself, had done all the work for me, and all I had to do now was sit back and watch as it unraveled further. Later that night, after the party had died down and I was back home, comfortably curled up on my couch with a book in hand, my phone buzzed with a message from my aunt, the kind of text that immediately made my lips curve into a knowing smile. "Nathan's car got repossessed this morning." I stared at the message for a long moment, letting the weight of it sink in, letting the final piece of the puzzle click into place. The expensive life he had flaunted, the luxury he had paraded around, the constant need to rub his so-called success in everyone's face, it had all been a lie. Every last bit of it had been built on debt, on borrowed time, on maxed-out credit cards and payments he couldn't afford. Nathan had never really had anything. Or maybe I thought he had just spent so much time pretending to be someone important that he had started to believe his own lies. Nathan had always been a man who thrived on appearances, a person who believed that as long as he could convince others that he was successful, the truth wouldn't matter, as though the illusion of wealth could somehow replace the actual stability it required. Even now, after everything, after the moment where he had been handed the keys to the car he had once mocked, after the message from our aunt confirming that his beloved sports car had been repossessed in broad daylight, he still tried to act as if none of it mattered, as if he was in control of the narrative, as if he could simply laugh his way out of the truth. At the next family gathering, just a week after everything had unraveled, Nathan arrived without his flashy car, without his designer accessories, without the smug grin that he had once worn so effortlessly. And the difference was noticeable from the moment he stepped out of the passenger side of an Uber, something he had clearly hoped no one would see. He tried to recover quickly, flashing a grin that didn't quite reach his eyes, joking about how it was just easier not to drive sometimes, making some offhand comment about how his sports car was in the shop. A weak excuse that might have worked if people hadn't already heard the truth. The murmurs had already spread through the family, the quiet conversations exchanged between relatives who had once admired his supposed wealth now filled with a different kind of tone, one that carried more pity than envy, more realization than admiration. I didn't say anything when I saw him that night, didn't feel the need to remind him of how quickly everything had fallen apart, didn't bother pointing out the way his confidence had dimmed, how he seemed just a little smaller, just a little less sure of himself, just a little more aware that people were seeing him for who he really was. There was no need for me to twist the knife, no reason to gloat or throw his words back in his face, because life had already done the work for me, and nothing I could say would be more powerful than the silence that followed him wherever he walked. His girlfriend, who had once clung to him like a trophy, was nowhere to be seen, and I wasn't surprised in the slightest. The moment she had started to suspect the truth, the moment the cracks in his story had started to show, she had begun distancing herself, her carefully measured affection slowly fading as she likely weighed her options, as she calculated whether staying with him was still worth it. Apparently, she had come to the conclusion that it wasn't, and now Nathan stood alone, the woman who had once looked at him with admiration now replaced by a ghost of what he had lost. I watched from a distance as a few family members who had once fawned over his success now regarded him differently, as they offered him polite smiles but little else, as they avoided asking about his car or his finances, as they treated him not like the golden boy he had once portrayed himself to be, but as someone they no longer knew how to categorize. Without his wealth, without the illusion of effortless success, Nathan didn't hold the same appeal to them anymore, and that, more than anything, was what truly seemed to shake him. He had spent his whole life believing that money and status were the keys to respect, that people only valued those who could flaunt their success, but now he was learning the hard way that admiration built on lies never lasts. I could have walked up to him in that moment, could have offered some final remark that would have cemented the lesson he was learning, but I didn't need to. The weight of reality was pressing down on him harder than any words I could say, and I had nothing to prove, nothing to gain from rubbing it in. Instead, I simply went about my evening, joining conversations with people who didn't feel the need to prove anything, with family members who understood that true success isn't about what you show, it's about what you actually own, about what you build, about what remains standing when everything else falls away. As I left that night, stepping into my brand new SUV, the one I had purchased without debt, without stress, without the need to announce it to the world, I glanced in Nathan's direction one last time, watching as he stood there, hands in his pockets, staring at nothing in particular, the weight of his choices finally settling in. Some people chase status. Others build wealth. Nathan learned the difference a little too late.